As you work in Excel, you may have a time when you have a spreadsheet that while you have most of the information and can type it in, there is some information that you need to get from another spreadsheet or another workbook even. And so you find yourself going to that second workbook and copying and pasting and copying and pasting to be able to complete your first spreadsheet. Well, you may not need to do that. Instead, what you may want to do is use a lookup function. And there are three of them. There's Vlookup for vertical lookup, there's HLOOKUP for horizontal lookup, and then a new feature is XLOOKUP, which lets you use either the V or the H features, which is kind of nifty. Well, we're going to start with probably the most popular of those three, which is Vlookup, and look at some tips along the way that will help you be successful in using this function. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's get started with Vlookup. Looking at our example today, we can see that it is a monthly mileage tracker. And it doesn't require a whole lot of information. We simply put in the date we traveled, where we traveled to, and it's assumed that that's a round trip travel, by the way. And then what was the mileage? And then in D, we've already added in the formula for the allowable rate for which we will be reimbursed. Over on the right, instead of having a separate spreadsheet, because this is just so small, we've added in the cities that we've traveled to, kind of in the order that we traveled, so they're not in any kind of specific order, but we have the city and then the mileage. Well, what we want to do is be able to type a location or the city here that we traveled to and have Excel do the work and plug in the mileage from this list on the right, rather than copying and pasting and copying and pasting, and maybe you don't travel for a month or so and then you have to look up everything again. We have this list that will really help us be consistent in how we do our reporting. To start off, we need to go to C4 where we want to add in our formula, and we're going to go up above the ribbon to the fourth tab, which is the Formulas tab. And then of those buttons within the function library, I'm fairly certain it's a lookup and reference type of formula. So I'm going to click on that drop down, and then I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom to find Vlookup and click on it. Now it even tells me that Vlookup looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table and then returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. By default, the table must be sorted in ascending order, and already I can see we may run into some bumps here because ours isn't sorted that way. Well, the first thing that we want to find here is the lookup value. So let's look at the explanation for the lookup value. The lookup value is the value to be found in the first column of the table and can be a value, a reference, or a text string. The first column here in the table is the city. So what we are looking for is in our main spreadsheet on the left, which one of these cells is going to be the same thing, is going to match the cities that are in column H. Well, that would be B4, location. And so the lookup value is B4. Then we need to define this table on the right a little bit more. So I'm going to click in the next box where it says table array. We're going to come down to the definition where it says table array is a table of text, numbers, or logical values in which data is retrieved. Table array can be a reference to a range or a range name, and we'll do an example of that a little bit later. But for right now, that table array as we know it is H3 because we're going to include the column names as well as the different values within that table. So it is H3 through I9. Then the column index number is simply the column number in the table array from which the matching value should be returned. The first column of values in the table is column 1. So what that's telling us is city is column 1, mileage is column 2. Well, what we want to do is type in the city in B4, and then we want our function in C4 to say, oh, well, city, all right, that is column 1, but when we find the city in column 1, we want to go to column 2 to report that mileage. So the column index number that we want to report is 2. And for now, we're going to leave this range lookup blank, and we're going to click OK. It says NA here in C4 because I haven't typed in a location yet. So let me type in St. Louis. And it says, oh my goodness, not quite right, is it? The St. Louis is 484. And what it's done instead is it's come to the very last value here in that table to report the 352. Well, remember how when we first looked at this formula, this function, it said that the first column here needs to be sorted, and we didn't do that. So let's click in the first column. We're going to go to the Home tab of the ribbon and then go over to the right to Sort and Filter. Click on that drop down and we're going to sort A to Z. And look at that. St. Louis has automatically adjusted now to 484, which is correct. Well, let's copy this formula then down all the way in column C down to row 13. And let's put in some more values. So in, say, 7, let's put Joplin. And tab, and let's see, yep, Joplin, 336, and it's done the math for the amount that I'm going to be reimbursed. Oh, this is pretty cool. Let's come down to 12, and let's put in Columbia. And wait a minute, it says NA. Well, but why? Let's try another one. Let's come over to 10 and let's do Jefferson City. That is still NA. So obviously we have an issue still. So let's think about that. Let's go back to C4. Our lookup is B4, and then that will adjust every time as we go down. B6, B9. But wait a minute. This table array started at H3 through I9. If I come down to where I was hoping to get an answer for Columbia, it says H11 through I17. Oh, there's just no table there at all to find the answer. So what we need to do is come back up to C4, and we need to make this table have absolute values so that the references to this table don't move as we copy the formula. Just before the H and the 3, I'm going to add $signs. Sadly, my recording prevents me from using the F4 key on the keyboard, but generally you could simply click before the H and before the I and press F4, and it would add those $signs in for you. Well, now I'm going to go to the left of my formula bar and click on that check mark to set in the formula, and then I'm going to use the fill handle to click and drag down. Oh, and look at that, Joplin, 336, that's correct. Jefferson City, 306. Columbia, 238. That is correct. So now, no matter where I go and type a city name, and press enter, it finds that information in this table over at the right. This is really cool. And then it even does the math for me and puts in the correct amounts. As we look at our next example, we can see that it is exactly the same as what we used in the first example, a monthly mileage report. And as we look here in columns H and I, we can see that we've already sorted column 1. But here's the interesting part. If I click and drag over H3 through I9, like we did in our previous example, if I come over to the left to the name box, we can see that I have gone ahead and named that table a range name, city_name. So that means that this is now defined with absolute references. Well, what does that mean to our formula then? When I come to C4 and I again go to Lookup and Reference and Vlookup, my lookup value is still B4 because that is the cell that matches the first column at the table on the right. The table array, though, when I click and drag over it, look what happens to my formula. The table array picks up that range name as city name. And then for my column index number, it is going to be 2. Now this time, let's see if there's any difference when we go to the range lookup and we select false, which, by the way, most of the time you'll probably use because false requires an exact match. If there isn't an exact match in the city, then it's not going to report any mileage either. So we'll click OK. And then I do need to come over to B4 and type in some sort of a city name here to see if this even worked at all. So I type in Joplin and it says the mileage is 336. Well, that is correct. Now we can go to the fill handle and click and drag down. And this time, even in row 13, in B13, I can type, say, Columbia. When I press tab, there it is, Columbia 238. It has looked at this table and defined where it is. So now no matter where I type in a city over here on the left, it finds that table and reports the correct mileage value. That is really great, isn't it? For our next example, we have kind of a fun example more than a realistic example, but we have some sort of an event where we are selling tickets, and we want to be sure that people are really showing their ID, and when they show their ID, they get the appropriate discount. Tickets are, as you can see in column E here, $15 a piece for the right age group, and then everyone else gets some sort of a discount as shown here on our table on the right. So if you have basically a toddler or an infant, they come in free. And then younger kids get a 20% discount, whereas your teenagers get about a 10% discount. If you're an adult, sorry, you get to pay the whole thing. And then if you're 60 and above, you're considered a senior and you get a 15% discount. First of all, let's type in some birth years here. And in column B, we have a formula that says we're going to take this current year and then subtract the birth year that's on their ID, however they show us that, to get their correct year. Let's type in some birth years. So let's see, 2020, 2000, 1950, 2018, 2007, and 2016. We have a 3-year-old up to a 73-year-old and every age in between. Now that we have that, we want to go ahead and figure out the ticket type in column C. To do that, we'll of course go to Formulas tab and then Lookup and Reference, and we're going to scroll down to Vlookup. Now the ticket type, what is the lookup value? Well, according to our table on the right, column 1 is age. So the lookup value must also be the age here in our spreadsheet, which is B4. The table array is what we see in this table on the right. So it is H3 through J8. And we already know that we need to have absolute references for that table array. So I'm going to put a $sign in front of the H and the 3 and the J and the 8. And then for the column index number, well, for this one, we want to know the ticket type, and the ticket type is the second column of this table in column I. So the ticket type is child, kids, student, adult. So that is number 2. Now, we don't have every age from 0 through, well, 73. We don't even have every age from 0 to 5. So we cannot use an exact match. We must use an approximate match. To do that, we're going to use either true in that range lookup box, or we're just going to simply omit it. And we're just going to leave it blank and click OK. From here then, we're going to find the fill handle and click and drag down. So let's do some testing. Our 23-year-old is an adult. That's correct. The senior here, who is 73, is certainly older than the 60 for seniors, so they qualify as a senior. We do have an exact match for kids at 5, and then we have a student who is 16, and that is correct. It's between 13 and 21. And then we have another kid who is 7, that's between 5 and 13. That logic has worked out. Now we want to figure out their ticket discount. And we'll go through about the same number of steps in the same way. In D4 here, we'll go back to Lookup and Reference, go to Vlookup. What is our lookup value? Well, it is still the age, because that is what is in the first column in our table. So going back to our spreadsheet, it is B4. What is the table array? Well, it is H3 through J8, and again, we already know that that needs to have a $sign in front of H and 3 and J and 8 as we create absolute references. And then for our column index number, well, we want to figure out the discount. So this time it's column 1, 2, 3. And again, we're going to leave the range lookup blank because we want to have an approximate match, not an exact match. And we'll click OK. And then we'll use our fill handle to click and drag down. And let's see what we have. So for our child who is 3, they don't pay anything. It's free. For our adult, they're paying the full price. And then for our senior, they get a 15% discount, which is correct. We have a student who gets a 10% discount. And again, student at 16 is correct. We've taken something that's fairly complex with several different kinds of math and made it very easy using our Vlookup to help fill in those blanks and keep us from doing a lot of copying pasting where we could have some error when we have a lot of people who are buying these tickets. Sometimes what you need to do is have your spreadsheet on one worksheet, but then use a table from another worksheet. So for example, we have here department contact information, and we don't have a very large department, but if I go to the next worksheet you can see that we have a much larger company, and maybe this is even just a sampling of the company and the people who are in it. So in this company address book, we have their employee ID, their name, their title, their phone, and their email. We don't really want all that information. For our department address book, all we need is their name and their phone number, and to find the name, we need to have their employee ID, which I've already added here on the left. So how do we find their name within this list? I'm going to go to Lookup and Reference, and then scroll down to Vlookup, and it's going to ask me for the lookup value. Now the lookup value is what is in the first column of that table on the other sheet, which is the employee ID. So my lookup value here in my spreadsheet is employee ID as well, or A4. The table array, when I click in that box, it's not here on this worksheet, it's in another worksheet. So I'm going to go to the worksheet tab where it is found and click. And as soon as I do, the table array box now shows the name of that tab in single quotes with an exclamation point at the end. And then I need to, of course, define this particular table by clicking and dragging, or if I know those cell names, then I could simply type them in. Now, again, I know from experience that I need to have absolute references for that table. So I'm going to put in a $sign in front of the A and in front of the 3, in front of the G, and in front of the 23. And then something else happens. I need to be sure to figure out the column index number of what I'm going to report back to my spreadsheet here, because if I don't, as soon as I leave this table array box, it takes me back to the original spreadsheet. So before I leave, what is the column index number? Well, I want the name, so let's see, ID is 1, name is 2. Now when I click in the column index number box, see how it takes me back to that spreadsheet, but I can still type in the 2. Now the range lookup, we know this needs to be absolutely a match because we don't want to have the wrong person's name matched to the wrong ID. We don't want any approximation here. So I need to, according to the instructions, find an exact match by typing false, which seems kind of backwards, but that's the rule. So we'll click OK, and now we have Ada King, who is employee 2057, and we can very easily use the fill handle to click and drag down and fill out the rest of the information. Now, I also want to get everyone's phone number. So it's essentially the same idea here as what we did before. We'll go back to Lookup and Reference, scroll down to Vlookup. The lookup value is still the employee ID, because that's the first column of that table array, which in this case is A4. What's the table array? Well, again, we're going to go down to the company address book sheet tab, click on it, and it fills in all of that information for us. But now we need to select the cells that are also in that table array, which is A3 through G23. So I must be careful and remember to put in the $signs so that I have the absolute references that are needed. And then before I leave here, I want to figure out the column index number for the phone. Now in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll type in the 6. The range lookup is again false because it must be an exact match. We don't want anybody calling the wrong person. And we'll click OK. Let's check. Ada King is 729 and it ends with 1719. Let's go to the company address book, find Ada King, and it ends with 1719. That is right. So we are on track to be accurate. We'll click and drag down, and now we have the phone numbers and the names of everyone in our department, but we still have the big company address book as well. For our last example, we're going to look at a small company that gives its customers a receipt, and the receipt is based on its inventory list. Now, the inventory list is in a totally different workbook. And so I can come down and switch over to this inventory. And so we can see that now this isn't the whole inventory, but it does have an item number, a description, a unit price, and then it even says how many they have in stock. And so if we want to give our customer a receipt, we will look at the item, and on it there will be a label for the item number, and of course they will tell us how many they want, but we need to find the description and the unit price from that other workbook. So easy enough to do. We simply follow the same ideas. We just need to be sure that we are clicking in the right place. So for the description, we'll go to Lookup and Reference and come down to Vlookup. And what is the lookup value? Well, in this case, it's the item number. And then for the table array, we'll click here, but we're going to shift over to our other workbook. And when we click on the tab for that workbook, it not only puts in the name of the workbook in square brackets, as you can see here, but it also puts in the worksheet name in single quotes with the exclamation point, and you don't have to worry about any of that. All we need to do is select the cells that are in that inventory, and then make sure that there are absolute references, and look at that. When we switched to a different workbook, it even made that table have absolute references. Ooh, I'm liking this. Now, just like before, we need to be careful and look at the column index number now. So we have the item, the description is column 2. So we'll type that in, and even before we start typing in the 2, it shifts us back to our first original spreadsheet where we have the receipt, and we type that in. Now, this is another case where we want to have an exact match because we don't want to have the wrong description applied to the item. So for the range lookup, we definitely want to type false, and we'll click OK. And it says NA now because we haven't put in a quantity or an item, but we're going to use the fill handle and click and drag down almost all the way down. And then for the unit price, we're basically going to do the same thing again. We'll go to Lookup and Reference, find Vlookup. What is the lookup value? Well, it is still the item number. What is the table array? Well, we're going to go back to that other workbook and click on that worksheet tab just so that it's so much easier to fill in all of that information and get all of the punctuation exactly correct. And then we'll click and drag over A3 through D26. And again, it has put the dollar signs in for us. So before we go back, let's look at this column index number. We want to put in the unit price. So that's 1, 2, column 3. I'll click in the box, and as soon as I click in the box, it's shifted back to that original spreadsheet. And again, for our range lookup, because we need an exact match, we're going to put false and click OK. And then we'll use our fill handle all the way down. Now, for the quantity, let's just put in some numbers here. We'll say, okay, we want one of number 6623, press enter, and it says, well, it's a pressure washer and it's $190. Well, let's see, we actually want a quantity of 5, and that is item 7773, and I'll press enter. That's landscape fabric. We also want 2 8601, and for our last item is 8785. And so here we have the unit price, and then we can see that the line total is a very simple formula that multiplies the quantity times the price. And we have all of those. Now we do get these NAs, so if you want to pretty it up for your customer, you would simply delete any of the formulas that are not needed. But then down at the bottom, I even have a subtotal, which is just simply adding all of these lines together. And then a sales tax, which is just another very simple formula, and then a total formula. This becomes an amazingly easy way to give your customer the information that they need by using Vlookup. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.